The doors didn't just open, they yielded. The prince stepped into the room, his presence instantly vacuuming the air out of the chamber. He was dressed in robes of deep obsidian silk, embroidered with gold thread dragons that seemed to writhe in the morning light. He looked immaculate, not a hair out of place, no sign of the exertion of the night, while Si Hua sat amidst the wreckage of his own dignity. The prince held a small, delicate bowl of white jade. The steam rising from it smelled of sweet bird's nest and rock sugar, a scent so wholesome it felt like a mockery in this room. "Out," the prince said. He didn't raise his voice, but the internal power, qi, behind the word made the ceramic vases on the shelves hum. The servants scrambled. Ajia lingered for a heartbeat too long, his eyes burning with a mix of terror and defiance. The prince didn't even look at him, but with a casual flick of his sleeve, a gust of invisible force sent Ajia stumbling toward the door. As Ajia fell, his hand brushed against Si Hua's knee. A small, icy-cold object slipped from his palm into the folds of Si Hua's inner robe. The silver needle. The doors slammed shut. Silence returned, heavy and suffocating. The prince approached the bed. The golden seal on Si Hua's neck began to throb violently, a searing heat that made his vision swim. It was as if the prince's very proximity was a command for his blood to boil. "You look pale," the prince murmured. He sat on the edge of the bed, the weight of his body sinking into the mattress, forcing Si Hua to tilt toward him. He dipped a porcelain spoon into the jade bowl. "The court was tedious this morning. I found myself thinking only of your stubbornness." He held the spoon to Si Hua's lips. Si Hua clenched his jaw, his eyes fixed on the prince's cold, handsome face. "Drink," the prince commanded. When Si Hua didn't move, the prince's eyes darkened. He didn't use his hands. Instead, he released a subtle pulse of his royal qi. Si Hua felt his jaw muscles betray him. They went slack under the invisible pressure, his mouth forced open by the prince's sheer will. The sweet, warm liquid was poured in, felt like ash in Si Hua's throat. As the prince leaned in to wipe a stray drop from Si Hua's chin, his thumb brushed over the glowing mark on his throat. "Do you feel that, Si Hua? That pulse? That is my life force humming inside yours. You can hate me until your heart stops, but as long as it beats for me." Underneath the heavy silk of his robe, Si Hua's fingers closed around the hidden silver needle. The metal bit into his palm, a sharp, grounding pain. Li Yan had given him a choice. Use the numbing poison to deaden the qi seal and risk the prince's lethal wrath, but if the plan to escape were RKS, they'd be far gone before the prince can. Prince leaned closer, his breath ghosting over Si Hua's ear. "Tell me you understand who owns you." The atmosphere in the room curdled from a cold intimacy to a sharp, lethal tension. The prince's eyes, dark and bottomless like a mountain lake in winter, didn't flicker. He had survived 19 years of poisoned wine, hidden daggers, and brothers who wanted him dead. He could scent the metallic tang of betrayal before it even touched the air. As the silver needle glinted for a fraction of a second in the sunlight, the prince's hand moved, not with haste, but with the terrifying, fluid speed of a strike. Clack! With a brutal flick of his wrist, the prince slapped the needle from Si Hua's trembling fingers. It hissed through the air, embedding itself deep into the dark wood of the bedpost. The silence that followed was deafening. The prince didn't yell. He simply stared at the empty palm of Si Hua's hand, his jaw tightening until a muscle leaped in his cheek. 19 years, the prince whispered, his voice like the grinding of tectonic plates. And you thought a scrap of silver and a boy's desperation would be my end? He didn't wait for an answer. Bring him in. The doors flew open. 2 guards, their armor clanking like a funeral march, dragged Li Yan to the center of the room. They didn't let him kneel. They kicked the back of his knees, forcing him down so hard his kneecaps cracked against the cold stone floor. Li Yan let out a strangled cry, his face pale and slick with sweat, but his eyes immediately sought out Si Hua. He saw the needle in the bedpost. He saw the prince's towering rage. He knew it was over. The prince stood up, his tall silhouette blocking out the sun, casting a long, jagged shadow over both of them. He walked slowly toward Li Yan, the hem of his obsidian robes sweeping over the floor like a dark tide. You, the prince said, looking down at the 17-year-old boy as if he were an insect. You were given the honor of serving the young master. Instead, you chose to give him the means to commit a capital crime. The prince turned back to Si Hua, his eyes burning with a cruel golden light. The chi seal on Si Hua's neck flared with a sudden, agonizing heat, mirroring the prince's fury. Si Hua gasped, clutching his throat, his body forced by the invisible weight of the bond. Every choice has a price, Si Hua, the prince murmured. He reached out and grabbed Lion by the hair, forcing the boy's head back to expose his throat. You wanted to use a needle? Then let us see how your heart fares when I use a blade on the only thing you have left. The bitter cup of betrayal. The prince did not draw a blade. Instead, he let go of Lion's hair with a look of profound boredom, as if the boy's life weren't worth the effort of an execution. Lion slumped forward, gasping for air, his forehead pressed against the cold stone. You think death is the end of the story, the prince said, his voice dropping into a low, terrifying silkiness. He turned his gaze back to Si Hua, who was trembling on the bed, his hand still frozen where the needle had been. But in this palace, death is a mercy, and I am not feeling merciful. The prince gestured to the jade bowl of medicine, the draft of eternal obedience, still steaming on the table. Lion, the prince commanded. Pick up the bowl. Lion looked up, his eyes wide and bloodshot. Your Highness, please. Pick up. The prince's chi flared, the invisible pressure forcing Lion's hands to move like a puppet's. The boy's fingers shook so violently the jade clattered against his teeth as he crawled toward the table. The prince looked at Si Hua, a cruel, beautiful smile touching his lips. From this day forward, no servant but this boy will touch your food. No hand but his will dress your wounds. And every drop of the obedience draught you drink will be poured by him. Si Hua's breath hitched. No, he whispered. You can't. If he spills a single drop, the prince continued, ignoring Si Hua's plea, he loses a finger. If you refuse to take it from his hand, he loses an eye. By the time you are truly obedient, Si Hua, let us see how much of your precious friend is left. The prince leaned down, his face inches from Si Hua's. The golden seal on him,